They thought I was old and done. They thought I'd hand over my life's work with a smile. They forgot I built my fortune with my own two hands, and I could take it back the same way. I'm John McAllister, 72 years old. Born in a town no one's heard of and made my money in places most of my neighbors couldn't find on a map. I'm not a saint, but I worked. I bled. I took risks nobody else would touch. And when the dust settled, I had a small empire, businesses, property, investments. Enough to keep my family secure for generations. Or so I thought. Somewhere along the way, my kids started thinking they were owed it. Like my success was a public trust they were just waiting to inherit. They had no jobs worth talking about, no real skills. But they had big appetites. New cars every year, vacations in places they couldn't pronounce. All on my dime. I told myself I'd let them enjoy it while I was around. But last Thanksgiving, something snapped. We were at my house in St. Augustine, the big white colonial I'd restored myself. I was carving the turkey, trying to ignore my son-in-law bragging about his business ventures that I knew were nothing more than burning through my loans. My oldest son, Rick, poured himself a drink and said, "Dad, when you're gone, I'm selling this place. Too old-fashioned. We'll get something modern. We'll get something modern." Like it was already theirs. Like I was a guest in my own home. I didn't say anything. I just kept cutting the turkey. But inside, I made a decision. They weren't going to coast through life on what I'd built. Not without earning it. That night, I went to my study, closed the door, and pulled out the leather folder that held my will. It was 3 pages long, neat and clear, everything split evenly between my children. All they had to do was outlive me. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up the phone. "Daniel," I said when my lawyer answered. "We're changing everything." The next morning, over coffee, I laid it out for him. The inheritance stays, but only if each of my children spends 12 consecutive months working for a charitable organization. No salary, no special perks, no touching family money during that year. Rent, groceries, gas, all on them. If they quit early, the clock resets. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "They're going to hate this." "I'm counting on it," I said. We spent the next few weeks tightening every detail. It had to be airtight. No loopholes, no clever shortcuts. And while we were at it, I started looking into moving my assets into a trust, something untouchable, even if they tried to challenge me in court. By Christmas, it was done. My old will was shredded. The new one was signed, sealed, and locked away in Daniel's office. The trust papers were filed. My empire was out of reach. And then I waited. The first crack came in January. Rick needed money for urgent repairs on his house, a house I'd paid for. I told him he could sell the sports car if it was that bad. My daughter, Melissa, tried to guilt me into covering her business retreat in Aspen. I reminded her that her salon hadn't turned a profit in 3 years. By March, they started sniffing around. I caught wind of whispered conversations at family dinners I wasn't invited to. Words like unfair and control freak floated back to me through the grapevine. I kept quiet because I knew what was coming, and when it came, I was ready. It happened on a Thursday morning. The kind of morning where the Florida air feels heavy before the sun's even up, like it's warning you about a storm that isn't on the radar. I was sitting on the back porch with my coffee, watching the river drift by, when I saw their cars pull in one after another. Rick's oversized SUV first, then Melissa's black Mercedes, and finally my youngest, Andrew, in his beat-up sedan. They never came together like that unless there was a common enemy. And this time, it was me. Rick stormed up the steps first, not even bothering with a hello. "We need to talk." "Now." I didn't move from my chair. "You're already talking. Might as well sit down before you overheat." Melissa brushed past him, sunglasses still on like she was about to walk a runway. "Dad, we heard about the will." Her voice had that mix of anger and disbelief, like she was sure it was just a bad rumor. Andrew hovered at the edge of the porch, quiet, eyes darting between his siblings and me. He's always been the peacekeeper, or at least the one who hates confrontation. But even he looked tense. Rick slapped a printed copy of the new will on the table. "This? This is insane. A year of charity work? No salary? No access to our money? What are you trying to prove? I took a slow sip of coffee. First off, it's not your money. Second, I'm proving that if you want what I've built, you can put in some work that doesn't serve yourself for once in your lives. Melissa's jaw dropped. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Me, working some soup kitchen or sorting donations in a thrift store. People would talk. They already talk, I said, keeping my voice even. They talk about how you've never had a job you didn't quit or get fired from. Rick leaned in, both hands on the table. This is a control move, Dad. You're punishing us because you can't stand the idea of letting go. I set the coffee cup down, hard enough to make it rattle. Letting go? You've been letting go of responsibility since you could walk. I'm just making sure the family fortune doesn't rot in the hands of people who think entitlement is a skill. That's when Melissa's voice cracked into something sharper. We'll challenge it. We'll go to court. You think you can just lock everything away? We have rights? I almost smiled. There it was, the line I'd been waiting for. I'd seen it coming for months, maybe years. And I had the answer locked and loaded. By all means, I said, leaning back in my chair. But you should know, every cent, every property, every stock and bond is already in a trust. You can't touch it. Not until you finish the year. No judge can change that. Silence. The kind of silence where you can hear the hum of the cicadas over the sound of your own breathing. Rick's face went red. You've lost it. You actually think we're going to play your little game. I stood then, slow and steady, until we were eye to eye. It's not a game, Rick. It's your last chance to prove you can stand on your own without my wallet in your back pocket. You fail? You get nothing. Simple as that. Melissa pulled off her sunglasses and threw them onto the table. This is unbelievable. No, I said. What's unbelievable is watching 3 grown adults live like parasites and thinking they deserve a payday for it. Andrew finally spoke up, his voice low. Dad, you could have just told us you don't trust us. I don't, I said, not flinching. But I'm giving you the chance to earn it. They didn't stay much longer. Rick muttered something about lawyers as he stomped down the steps. Melissa's heels clicked angrily across the porch. Andrew lingered for a second, then left without a word. When their cars pulled away, I sat back down and poured myself another coffee. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't pounding. If anything, I felt lighter, because now the game had started. And the thing about me is I've never lost a game I set the rules for. I've learned one thing about fights like this. You don't win by yelling across the table. You win by collecting enough rope for your opponent to hang themselves, and then stepping back to watch them do it. That's where Daniel came in. We'd known each other since high school, back when the only thing we fought over was who could throw a football farther. These days, Daniel was a forensic accountant with a nose for lies hidden in balance sheets and time cards. If someone tried to cheat the system, he'd find it. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon. I need you to help me keep my kids honest, I said, my voice flat. There was a pause, then a chuckle. John, that might be the most impossible job you've ever given me. That's why I called you. When Daniel showed up at my house, I was already at the kitchen table with the trust agreement spread out in front of me. The afternoon sun cut across the room, catching dust motes in the air. It felt like the calm before a storm. He read in silence, the tip of his pen tapping against the page. You made it ironclad. But here, he pointed to the audit clauses. This is where we tighten the noose. See, the charity requirement in my will wasn't just words on paper. It came with strict verification, GPS check-ins, supervisor signatures, documented hours, even security footage if needed. The trust had the right to halt every cent if they found a single fake entry. And I knew my kids, they'd rather fake it than sweat for it. 2 weeks in, my bet paid off. Daniel slid a printout across the table. Melissa's timesheet claimed she worked a full Saturday shift at the thrift store. Now, he said, pulling out his phone, look at this. On the screen, a photo, time-stamped to the exact minute she was supposed to be sorting clothes inside. She was outside instead, leaning against her car, sipping a latte like she was on vacation. Designer sunglasses. Expensive handbag. Zero effort. I stared at the image, a slow burn rising in my chest. She didn't even try to hide it. Daniel smirked. You wanted proof. Now you've got it. I forwarded the evidence to the trust's compliance officer with a short message for your review. No explanation, no emotion, just enough to let them draw their own conclusions. By the next morning, an email sat in my inbox. Case under review. Payments suspended pending investigation. It was the first crack in their wall of entitlement. And cracks have a way of spreading. When the trust froze Melissa's stipend, it was like kicking a hornet's nest. She stormed into my driveway 3 days later, the engine of her luxury SUV still rumbling as she left the door hanging open. Her heels clicked hard against the concrete, a sharp, angry rhythm. You did this, she spat before I even stood up from the porch chair. I took a sip of coffee slow. If by this you mean the consequences of your own actions, then sure. Her face tightened. You think you can control me like I'm still 16? I'll find another way. You just watch. I let a thin smile curl at the edge of my mouth. I don't need to watch, Melissa. The trust is watching for me. Her jaw worked, but she said nothing. She spun on her heel, the scent of her expensive perfume trailing after her like a challenge. Daniel and I didn't waste time. If Melissa was sloppy, David, my eldest, was arrogant. He picked a small nonprofit to work at, the kind of place that runs on volunteers who actually believe in the cause. I drove by one afternoon just to see. No David. Not a glimpse. Instead, his truck sat 2 blocks over, parked outside a bar with a neon beer sign glowing in the window. I snapped a photo. The sun was going down, and the light made the wet pavement shine like polished glass. In the reflection, I could see him inside, leaning over a pool table, laughing with friends, while his timesheet claimed he was loading boxes for the food pantry. Daniel nearly grinned when I handed him the picture. They're making this too easy, John. Good, I said. Let them dig deeper. By the end of that week, both Melissa and David were officially on compliance hold with the trust. Their accounts? Frozen. Their credit cards tied to those accounts? Declined in the middle of checkout lines. And that's when the phone calls started. First polite, then desperate, finally angry. Melissa's voice cracked on the last one. Dad, you can't do this to us. We have lives, commitments. Then keep them, I said. Your shift starts at 9. There was a pause, heavy and cold. You'll regret this. But she had it backward. The regret wasn't mine to carry. It was just getting started. By week 4, their complaints had turned into public theater. Melissa started posting cryptic messages online, black and white selfies with captions like, "Some people will do anything to control you." She wanted sympathy, maybe a little outrage in her corner. She didn't get what she expected. The comments were a mix of "get a job" and "welcome to reality." Turns out, people weren't lining up to cry over 2 grown adults who'd never worked a day in their lives. David tried a different tactic, charm. He showed up at my door one evening, wearing a pressed shirt and that practiced smile he'd used to get out of trouble since high school. Dad, he began, holding out a 6-pack of my favorite beer like it was a peace offering. Maybe we could renegotiate? I stepped aside and let him in. He took a seat at the kitchen table, glancing around like he was scoping the place out for hidden allies. You've made your point, he said. We get it. Responsibility, work ethic, all that. But freezing our accounts is exactly what it takes, I cut in. You think this is punishment. It's not. It's the terms. You want the trust? You work. Period. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. You know we can't live like this for a year. I set my coffee down and met his stare. Then you don't get the money. Simple math. His jaw twitched. That old, spoiled entitlement was still in there, fighting to keep its grip. He stood up, muttering something about lawyers. Good. Let them burn time and cash chasing an argument they couldn't win. The next blow didn't come for me directly, but I'll admit, I made sure it landed. Through Daniel's contacts, I passed word to the nonprofits where Melissa and David had signed up. A quiet tip: might want to check the hours they're logging against where they actually are. Within a week, both were called into compliance meetings. Melissa broke down in tears, claiming she was just taking breaks. David tried to bluff his way through, but the photo I'd taken of him in the bar somehow ended up on the director's desk. Result? Their volunteer records were scrubbed of false hours, which meant they were starting over. Square one. It was almost cruel, almost. But here's the thing, they'd never had to start over before. And watching them flail in unfamiliar waters, well, that was the point. The last time I saw them that month, they were in the grocery store, standing in front of the discount shelf, arguing quietly over a dented can of soup. Melissa's nails were chipped. David's shirt had lost its perfect press. They didn't see me, but I saw them. And I saw what was coming next. By midsummer, their private struggle was no longer private. Word spreads fast in a town like Brookhaven, especially when the Golden Children start showing up at community events in worn shoes and last year's clothes. Melissa's old ladies' brunch group met without her twice in a row. She posted a smiling selfie in front of the coffee shop, pretending she'd been inside with them. The truth? She was sitting on the bench across the street, sipping a paper cup of store-brand instant coffee. David fared worse. His poker nights, the ones he used to host in our family's lake house, moved to a friend's basement. No one invited him. The reason? He owed 3 of them money from before the trust mess. That debt wasn't going anywhere. The shame sat on them like humidity, constant, sticky, impossible to ignore. Then came the gala. Melissa had been attending the county hospital's annual fundraiser for years. It was her chance to glide in wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars. She'd shake hands, pose for photos, act like she ran the place. This year, she still showed up. But the dress was rented. I knew because I paid the rental company to accidentally send a size too small. Watching her navigate that crowd, tugging at the seams, avoiding the camera's eye, that was my private encore. David cornered me near the silent auction table. "You're enjoying this," he said flatly. "Not enjoying," I replied. "Learning you something. You think this makes us better people?" His voice was low, but sharp. "I think it gives you the tools to become better people," I said, picking up a bidding pen. "What you do with them is up to you." I didn't even look at him as I signed my name for the antique desk he'd been eyeing all night. Winning it wasn't about the desk. It was about showing him I still could. Later, I heard Melissa whispering to a friend near the coat check, "If we can just get through this year, it'll be over." That was when I knew they still didn't understand. This wasn't just about waiting out the clock. The trust wasn't a jail sentence. It was a test. And right now, they were failing. What they didn't know. The next move I had lined up wasn't going to wait until the year was over. By midsummer, their private mess had seeped out into the open. In a small town like Brookhaven, bad news doesn't just travel fast. It comes with commentary, embellishments, and an audience eager for a front row seat. Melissa was the first to feel it. Her ladies' brunch group, the same circle she used to dominate with vacation photos and jewelry, she claimed was just something I picked up, stopped inviting her. Twice in a row, they met without her. The third time, she tried to save face. Posted a sunny selfie in front of the coffee shop, tilted just right to catch the ivy-covered brick wall. But I knew. She wasn't inside sipping mimosas. She was across the street on a splintered bench, nursing a paper cup of store-brand instant coffee. Even in the photo, if you zoomed in, you could see the steam was barely there. David's world was shrinking too. His weekly poker nights, the ones he used to host in my old lake house with imported cigars and a stocked bourbon cabinet, had moved to a friend's basement. No one told him. The reason was as blunt as it was humiliating. He owed 3 of them money from before the trust thing. That debt had teeth now, and it was biting into his so-called friendships. The shame clung to them like July humidity, heavy, sticky, impossible to ignore. Then came the county hospital's annual fundraiser gala. Melissa had attended for years. It was her grand stage, an excuse to glide into the ballroom wearing a dress worth more than most people's cars, hair swept up in a way that said, "Yes, I have the time and money to look like this." She'd shake hands, pose for photographers, and make a show of outbidding someone for the children at the silent auction. This year, she still showed up. But the dress was rented. I knew because I made sure of it through a friend who managed the rental service. And for a small fee, they sent her a size too small. Watching her navigate that room was almost cinematic, the way she tugged at the seams, forced tight smiles, and subtly avoided every camera. She must have felt like the walls were lined with mirrors, each one reflecting a smaller, cheaper version of herself. David didn't fare any better. He arrived late, wearing a suit I recognized from a thrift shop in town, the cuffs just a little too short, the shoulders not quite right. He tried to keep his chin high, but every time someone asked about the lake house, his jaw tightened. He found me by the silent auction table. "You're enjoying this," he said, no question in his tone. "Not enjoying," I said without looking up. "Educating. You think this makes us better people?" His voice was low-sharp. "I think it gives you the tools to become better people," I replied, picking up the bidding pen. "What you build with them is up to you." Then, without even glancing his way, I signed my name for the antique oak desk he'd been eyeing since he walked in. Winning it wasn't about the desk. It was about reminding him that despite his performance tonight, I still had the ability to move pieces on the board whenever I pleased. I caught Melissa near the coat check later, whispering to a friend, "If we can just get through this year, it'll be over." That's when I knew they still didn't understand. The trust wasn't a clock they just had to wait out. It wasn't a sentence to be served. It was a test, one they were failing spectacularly. And the truth they hadn't begun to suspect? The next move I had lined up wouldn't wait until the year was over. By September, the town didn't just know about David and Melissa's situation, they had an opinion about it. And that opinion was rarely flattering. I'd been patient, deliberate. Every move until now had been a setup, a quiet nudge in the direction I wanted them to fall. But the pieces were where I needed them, and the urge to knock the whole thing down was crawling under my skin like an itch I couldn't scratch. The opening came in the form of the Brookhaven Rotary's Autumn Benefit, a fundraiser that doubled as the most public networking event in the county. Local business owners, politicians, and anyone with a name to protect would be there. And David, desperate to claw back some respect, had somehow convinced them to let him give a short speech about community resilience. It was too perfect. I showed up early, blending into the crowd. The room smelled like polished wood and overcooked salmon, the clink of glasses echoing under the high ceiling. I took a seat near the front, close enough for him to see me, but far enough that he couldn't read my expression. When David stepped up to the podium, he looked the part, navy suit, polished shoes, confident smile. But I could see it in his eyes, the weight of the debt, the humiliation, the slow bleed of status. He launched into his speech, peppering it with phrases like working together and building a future. That's when I made my move. Halfway through his talk, I stood up casually, like I was stretching my legs, and walked toward the side of the stage. In my hand was a thick manila envelope. I caught the eye of the event organizer, whispered something, and handed it over. She frowned, then glanced at me again before carrying it to the podium. David froze when she handed him the envelope. "It's, something from one of our sponsors," she said into the microphone, her voice uncertain. He opened it, pulled out the contents. Inside were photocopies of financial statements, his statements, overdraft fees, late mortgage notices, credit card balances, all underlined in red. And stapled to the top? A letter from the trust's attorney, making it very clear that his access to family funds was still off limits for another 7 months, assuming, of course, he completed his charity work. The room shifted. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd, like wind over tall grass. Whispers, sideways glances. David tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "Seems there's been a mix-up." "Not a mix-up," I said, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Just a reminder that integrity isn't measured in speeches." Melissa was in the corner, her face pale, eyes darting between me and the guests. She knew this was planned. She also knew it wasn't over. The organizer tried to steer things back on track, but the damage was done. David's voice shook through the rest of his speech, his words stumbling over each other like they wanted to get away from him. That night, their phones lit up with missed calls, not from friends offering sympathy, but from business contacts pulling out of deals, from committees rescinding invitations. I'd put the crack in the dam. Now I just had to wait for the flood. By October, David and Melissa were ghosts of the people they used to be. Not dead, just hollow. The kind of hollow that follows you into every room, every conversation, every reflection in the mirror. I'd been letting them twist in the wind for weeks. No money, no influence, no safety net. Their charity work had turned into a parade of humiliations, food drives where nobody showed up, community cleanups where they were the only ones holding a trash bag. People they used to impress now crossed the street to avoid them. I could have ended it there, but endings aren't satisfying unless the circle is closed. The closing came in the form of a certified letter delivered to them at the charity's dingy little office on a gray Thursday afternoon. I knew exactly when it would arrive. I knew Melissa would open it first. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was an invoice. From me. Every cent I'd quietly spent over the past year setting them up, the legal fees, the public filings, the property transfers, the anonymous sponsorships that kept them just barely afloat. Itemized. Precise. Total. $127,463. Payable immediately. On the second page was the clause they'd forgotten in the trust agreement. Any beneficiary who initiates legal action against the trust forfeits all rights to the inheritance. Their lawsuit back in April had done exactly that. The inheritance was gone. Permanently. I didn't need to see their faces when they read it, but I did. Through the office's smudged glass door, I watched Melissa sink into her chair, the paper trembling in her hands. David stood there for a long time, staring at nothing, his jaw working like he was chewing on a nail. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "We've got nothing." I stepped inside. Calm. Unhurried. "No," I said. "You've got exactly what you earned." I left before they could reply. The cold October air hit my face, sharp and clean. For the first time in a year, I breathed without the weight on my chest. And as I walked away, I didn't look back. Some endings deserve to stay behind you.